Today we're going to go over why this guy is going to be replacing this guy in the future. And give me a good one.
Good one?
Yeah. Boom. He's good at that. What's up, everybody? Today I am excited to continue to bring more characters into our content, and somebody you're going to be seeing a lot more of in the coming future, and that's one of our partners, Iain Harris, our head of content here at CTC. What's up, buddy?
What's up, man?
I can't believe this is the first time we've sat here on the couch together.
I can, because I've been hiding in the bowels of the edit bay and behind cameras. And
that's true. Many of you probably don't know this, but so Ian's one of our partners here, and he offices out of beautiful Oceanside.
Yep.
So we don't get him in the office too much, but him and his content team that have been a part of CTC now for about almost 2 years, coming up on 2 years pretty soon, so a year and 9 months or so. But we're stoked to have Iain, and my intro is sort of a joke about him and his team replacing us in terms of importance. And what I mean by that is that at CTC, on the media buying side, we continue to see us moving more and more to strategies that are about letting Facebook's algorithm do the work. And the tactics of media buying have sort of been reduced by a lot of these things like campaign budget optimization and value-based bidding and broad audience targeting with DPA, stuff that you've heard us talk about here, which just means that as Facebook's algorithm becomes more advanced, the tactics become less important.
Right.
And oftentimes introducing human decision making into the algorithm just creates bias and problem.
Right.
So what that means is that as tactics are reduced, the variable that becomes more and more important is creative. And so that was sort of the impetus for us coming together 2 years ago. After you had built a business called Hype Media, I've worked with some of the best brands in the world producing content, and we thought, hey, if we could put content and distribution together, we'll be more powerful. And now I believe that more than ever. So it's a pleasure to have you, and I'd love for you to start to maybe help to lay the groundwork for brands or people that are starting, that are maybe thinking about video as this big budget production thing that's for TV and all this different stuff, and maybe talk about how you see content today. How do brands selling product online think about content? And I know it's a broad question, but I think you can handle it.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about robots replacing us, like at a certain point in time, like robots will replace us, like holding cameras and creating the creative, which is a crazy thing to think about. But to your point, I mean, like really video content is like largely misunderstood, I think, just because it's a very simple thing. Like it's really simple. It's like you think about your brand, you think about presenting your brand across, you know, whether it's digitally or whether it's like actually printed, really you're just having a conversation. And so video can be in some ways the most effective and efficient way of having a conversation. Yeah. Obviously it's not the only way.
Right.
So I always just like talk to brands about like thinking about like developing a deep, meaningful conversation with consumers, but that assumes like we know who your consumer is, the first thing, and then the second thing which you assume is like you know what type of conversation is relevant having. So like that really forces brands to think about really their purpose and the message that they're putting out there, met by products that they're developing and kind of satisfying. So like given all of that broad stuff, the video is really just the words and the language and the conversation on a continuous basis. It's not just this asset because we know we have to market this new product and it's like, so let's make a video about it. Like, yes, that's how it plays out, but really it's understanding the customer journey and that conversation that's continuously happening. So whether that's like, what is that piece of creative in that conversation, that introduction, like, hi, my name's Iain Harris, like, what's your name, Taylor? Like, you're wearing a hat too. Like, whatever that lead, like, kind of hook conversation is, like, that's like, per se, like an ad, right? And then it's like, oh, okay, well, where are you from? Like, oh, you look like you play baseball or whatever. Like, so it's a more relatable conversation, and then maybe some type of education in the form of like a product video, like communicating your features and benefits. Like that's more about educating and sharing like what it is that I have to offer the relationship, and then all the way through to purchase. Like it doesn't end. It's about like, it's almost like that follow-up call, like after hanging out with someone, like, hey, like there was a really great time that like, you know, we had yesterday, killer movie, killer game, like love to hang out again. Like post-purchase content is basically welcoming, you know, consumers into a whole community with content. So there's a set of assets in video that isn't optimized for conversion or transaction in the sense that like that lead ad asset is. It's more of just like continuing the dialogue, you know?
That's so good. One of my favorite things to do when I meet a new entrepreneur is to ask them about their brand, hear the story that they tell me, and then go as a customer and try and see if my experience matches the story. Because a lot of times what you'll see is that the things people are excited to tell you about their brand are completely absent from the customer journey.
Right.
And so I think that idea of conversation is so critical, and that's what video has the potential to do so well if you really understand the story that you're trying to tell. And I think I was even sitting with a brand the other day, and they were telling me how, you know, their retail employees, like 40% of them are former servicemen and women at their stores, and it was the first thing they were so excited to tell me about their stores. But that's complete, like as a customer, I would never know that.
Where does that show up?
Exactly. And so just thinking about like the way it should show up is that when I buy something from that store, to your point, the next experience is, let me tell you about what you just became a part of.
Right.
Here's who our employees are, and here's a story of Joe and how it fits, you know. And so that exact idea, and I think sometimes just starting with conversation and listening and hearing, and even to put a mirror back to people and entrepreneurs and say like, this is who you say you are.
Right.
Now, how do we help someone have that experience as they come in and check out your brand? And one of the best ways to do that is through video. It's the best storytelling medium, and it's also the language of the platforms that people are on. So talk a little bit about how brands need to think about not the fact that they don't get to totally dictate how people consume content, and how they think about translating and communicating in the language of the mediums where people are.
Right. So it's simple. Once again, it's a conversation. So even though brands think about their marketing efforts and the videos and the photography and the assets that they create as like outbound, like they need to be open and receptive to hearing feedback and responding. And so like look at the content that you're putting out as a way to kind of gauge and see what conversations happen organically in the engagement, to then refine and develop assets after that. So that's like kind of back to my point about like, it's not about like developing this one video to do this thing. It's about developing assets to further engage and connect. So to your point, like the retail experience, like bringing to life that story of that individual, that 40% of the employees there were former service members, like that is something that could play out not just in video, it could play out in different platforms. And so maybe it is in the form of a post-purchase video, but maybe it's in the form of like little mini profiles on Instagram that's just a photo and someone standing there and like showing a photo of their former self and a little description about like what it meant to them to be in the service. Like that is a really, like I'm getting chills right now, because like that's a meaningful thing. And really the like medium and format of like whether video or still or even like copy, like it really doesn't matter. Like it's whatever is going to be most impactful. Sometimes like I love reading. Like sometimes the level of depth and emotion that you can get from like reading and like using your imagination is something that like is only like achieved through writing text and not through creating a 30-second video. So it's like it's all based upon like the consumption, right?
And that's great. I think there's this balance there that's really important, and one of it is like to not start with the format as the box through which you have to shove your brand through. I think it's to say, what does your brand story, like in what format is it best told? And then to go from there, right? Now there are constraints that we have to, if your audience lives on Instagram, there's parameters that you have to understand the limitations of. But some brands think that like everything should live in a 30-second spot, and not every story is meant to live there. I think about, we just watched, and Corey, maybe you can drop a little snippet of it here, of the our new FC Good Signatures series video, which I just watched, which is incredible. And it's a 3-minute story that's gonna live on social media that is a story worth telling, right? And it needed to live in that format because the story is worth 3 minutes, right? And so I think that is really critical for people to think, to start with what is the value proposition, what is it that I'm trying to communicate, and then how is it best told, given where my audience is, where I budget for distribution, and how does it come to life in that area.
Right, and so like we always say, like within the content team, like, because we're having to reprogram our minds, because 15, 20 years ago, it was like 30-second ad buy, 15-second ad buy. And yeah, there still are parameters like Instagram, like 60 seconds, like that's fine, but like really let the story dictate the length. instead of letting the length dictate the story.
Yep.
So like if you need more time to tell a story, it's probably a really good story.
Right.
So maybe it doesn't just live on Instagram.
Yep.
Maybe it goes somewhere else, or maybe there's like a web experience or something that you build around.
Yeah,
so like
maybe you use that as a tease to like you have to you definitely have to think about the value of each place and how it's told there.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and then how that plays out and how there are different touch points with that story.
Yep.
From like, hey, I saw this image about this dude who works at a local store.
Yep.
To then all the way on the other end, like maybe there's a 12-minute piece on his whole life, and it's like totally moving and incredible and like moves you to tears, right? And like everything along the way. So instead of like thinking about, well, set to 60 seconds, set to 30 seconds, we just have to reprogram the way we think, really.
Totally. So one of the things that we're always trying to figure out is how we create this blend of art and science here, right? How do we think about transactional content or measuring the value of content? We're big believers in the David Ogilvy school of thought that good marketing sells product, right? You giggle at it because I know it's the constant tension here. So how do you, as a content creator, coming into this world where everything is so transactional, and now we're starting to butt up against sort of brands that have to be able to think beyond the single day transaction, how has that journey been sort of coming into this for you, and how has it shaped your thinking both positively, and how do you think we have further to go in shaping the way that we think about content?
Right, so I think it's just reframing the way that you look at performance. Performance in someone engaging and purchasing your product is almost just an indicator of like how meaningful whatever the message is, or how meaningful the product is. Obviously, you know, that kind of rules out like just a cheaper, faster, better product. Like there's that exists, and I think all brands have to think that way. But ultimately, if you look at like sustainable, good brands, we're talking about long lifetime value. We're talking about new product like introductions where consumers are coming back and they're engaging with the brand. So like, I think it's just developing meaningful conversation. Like I'll say it again, like it's the dialogue that you're having. It's a meaningful dialogue. It's a meaningful relationship that you have with the consumers. And so people are moved by emotion. People are moved by connection and really like developing communities. So can you develop community out of content as a challenge that then is like parallel with the performance of like how much you're selling. So like it's not just that like single ad that's going to convert and doing more of just that. Like yes, that's the case, but it's thinking more holistically around like really like how do we support this brand to be sustainable and to grow and to lift and to develop like really communities, and even explore and find communities that maybe the brand didn't think about, or maybe as marketers we're not even really thinking about. Being open to that.
And the reality is we know you absolutely can build community around content. If you think about some of the most passionate communities in the world around things like comic books and like these areas where content has played a central, and storytelling has played a central role in bringing people together in a really meaningful way. And I think one of the things that you just hit on that we're beginning to sort of push this narrative more and more and more is that brands need to think about LTV as the core metric that they really evaluate the success of their brand on. And then the question becomes, what are the other signals that you can use as identifying ways in which people deepen their connection to brand? So we've talked about on our last episode a little bit about the lifetime value of customers who follow you on social versus those that don't. And I think you could make a similar argument for looking at the lifetime value of people who have consumed story content from you multiple times versus those that haven't. And I'm willing to make a bet without the data right now, but it's something we're going to keep looking into, that if you can take, I think about Yeti who does this so well, if you could take people who have watched long form, deep emotional stories multiple times from your brand, that their connection to your brand is going to be deeper, and it's going to show up in the amount that they purchase from you than those that don't. Now that's a really hard thing to look at on a single day transactional level, which is where a lot of people back away from it because it requires good hard data analysis and it's not, doesn't show up on your one day ROAS, you know? But it's really critical.
Well, and it's just thinking micro, macro, and that all comes down to like, well, what's the brand really looking for? Is this like a flashbang, like 1 year plan and move on, or is this something where, you know, it's a legacy brand? Like you look at, so like you mentioned Yeti, like Patagonia is probably like the even more extreme example where they've invested so much in their brand, not really intentionally, it just kind of happened with Yvonne, like even almost to the point of like being defiant and like doing the right things. So where does that, like 35 years later, where does that land them?
Right.
Like highest price point,
Yep.
best product,
Right.
hasn't really
Super
innovated or
passionate
changed.
community.
Yeah,
Yeah.
super passionate community, dictates and defines even the workplace.
Yep.
Internally, that's in conflict sometimes with generating revenue,
Yep.
right? Like with optimizing or like really being ultra efficient. So like, but all that said, like they've built the strong foundation over 35 years to be this powerhouse of a brand.
Right.
You know?
And a lot of times, and foundational development often doesn't show up in your one-day ROAS. Like that.
Exactly.
And I think holding that lens, and it's hard when you're an early brand where cash flow is everything. Come on in. But it's really critical to have that as a marketer, both that micro and macro view.
Right. And that same friction too. I mean, with, you know, short form transactional ad product, investing in the brand, like though there's not a duality there.
No.
Those are very connected.
Right.
And the more that you can understand how those two things are connected, the better that they will lift and like really kind of execute upon like really what your goal is. But first, identifying the goal. Is it a long-term play, foundational building, or is it what can we do today based on the survival of the brand? Like that's a different conversation.
Cool. Awesome. Well, you're going to be seeing a lot more from Iain and team. We'll also drop a link to this FC Goods video in the copy for you. In the copy, Corey, just relax. He always gets so mad when I say that. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Bye.